High turnover rates can be costly, disrupting operations and diminishing team morale. On the other hand, retaining skilled and motivated employees leads to better things like increased productivity, a stronger company culture, and sustained business success. With this in mind, today we're going to analyze the topic of managing employee turnover and staff retention. And to do this, I welcome Jeff Carmon, the Director of Business Development with Frantz Building Services and a consultant with Elite Business Coaching. Jeff, welcome.
Thanks, Jeff. It's great to see you again.
It's easy to remember your name. I like this.
It's easy, super easy for me as well.
Thanks again. And what a topic we're going to talk about. And here's why I think this is going to be a good one, or maybe different for me. I never thought of managing this. I thought of eliminating it.
Right.
Yet that probably is not a reasonable expectation. We're always going to have this issue of turnover and all the things that come with that. Can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, it's interesting. Before I came into this industry, I worked in the medical practice management industry, and we might have 20% turnover. And I got here to Frantz Building Services and just saw that was just a part of this industry. And so at Frantz Building Services, our turnover rate has been, since I've been here, it's been just a little south occasionally of 100%, but most of the time it's 100% or a little bit higher. So it's an issue that all of us, or most of us in the building services industry, have to deal with.
Why don't you do this? Share with us some strategies to managing employee turnover and staff retention, things that you've seen that really work, that those watching can say, I can use that.
Yeah. There's four or five that I'll cover, and the first one maybe kind of comes out of left field a little bit, and this is something that I've encouraged other BSCs to do in our company, and that is educate customers on the importance of having team members who make a reasonable wage. And we'll talk about that's one of the main turnover issues is employee pay. And so we talk a lot and do a lot of educating customers on the importance of team members getting paid well. The second one would be for companies to invest in, for lack of a better word, we call them floater positions. So these are people who can fill in spots whenever team members leave the company for a variety of reasons. And in our industry, a lot of times we don't get 2 weeks notice. And so having those people who can jump in and do the work when those people are gone. I think thirdly is hiring right fit team members. And I think there's a lot of work to do here. Not everybody that applies for a job or even gets a job at our company is set up to be a good cleaner. I would encourage people to do some personality tests, like for instance, the DISC test or the DISC profile is a good profile to vet cleaners through. And so that would be something else, is hiring the right fit people. One of the things that we see too is team members tend to leave in those first 30 to 60 days. And so I would encourage people to invest a lot of money and not a lot of money, but some money and some resources to make a lot of connection in that first 90 to 180 days. And then lastly, I would say is invest money in field leaders, those people who are kind of the go-to or the connection to the company. Those folks need to understand different motivations of employees and giving them the time to be out there engaging with employees. Those are kind of some keys that I see that would help with turnover and retention.
Those are good. I like those. And some, you mentioned spend some money on some things, but obviously valuable strategies there. I want to talk about the generations of workers, because how do you make this work when you think about the Gen X? What works for them might not work for millennials. That we have all these different generations of workers. Any thoughts there, Jeff?
Yeah, what's interesting is if I look at a profile of our company, we've got all generations. And what's interesting about those folks is, like, for instance, boomers, there's about 20% of our workforce are boomers. And those folks, what's interesting is they tend to stay with our companies a lot longer. And so they're staying at our company 5 years and longer. And then the Gen X and millennials, they're staying with us just a little bit over a year. But there's about 60% of our workforce that's in there. And then we've just got a little bit in Gen Z. But I think as companies, because our workforce is really becoming millennials and Gen X, we need to think about what's important to those folks, and what's important to what those folks in most work environments is different than a boomer. A boomer, I'm a boomer. I'm company first guy. That's my motivator. But for those folks, it's really the connectivity with the company, and then their ability to have some say so in the way things are done. So I think as we think about millennials, I think one of the things is to invest in onboarding and training so those people feel like they're a part of something special. They feel like we're investing in them. I think investing in connectivity, whether that's a newsletter or making sure that the field managers are out there investing time in those folks. And then also, I think these folks look for us to seek their input on how we can do things better, how we can do things more efficient. So that those two groups of folks, I think that's where we need to invest in those things.
You mentioned you're a boomer. You know, I missed it by 1 year.
Yeah. Well, I just got a hint under the bar.
According to what I see, I was born a year after the boomer generation ended and the Gen X
Yeah.
started. So I think I'm a Gen X. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
interesting, though, that the boomers are the ones you have more of working, and they're the oldest generation.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right. And those here's what's interesting when I look at tenure in our company, the boomers are they're staying with us 5+ years, where the rest of the folks are staying with us
Yeah.
just maybe a year or just a little bit less. So it's a completely different generation.
All plays into what we're talking about for sure.
That's right. That's right.
I know my next question might be brief because we're talking about employees, staff.
Mhm. Yes.
What about subcontractors? Because some watching this might use subcontractors to handle the work. Does this apply to them?
Uh, I guess in a sense, I mean, if you're subcontracting the work and you're hiring companies to do the work for you, you certainly want to find a vendor who, and maybe as your vetting process, you want to vet them on what their turnover is and the things that they're doing to reduce turnover and retention. But yeah, I mean, it's a different model. Everybody, all 500 people work for us at our company.
Good points to look at that from that angle, because even though you have a subcontractor, they have employees
That's right.
that are doing the work, and you want that to be consistent.
That's right. That's right.
Let's talk about company culture. Company culture is something that we talk about a lot, and some might think it's a cliche now. But what do you think? Does this play into that?
I think it does. I've wrestled with this question quite a bit, and we discuss it around the table, and we talk about pressing culture down all the way down to the end cleaner. One of the greatest challenges that we have in our industry is our cleaners are dispersed, and in many cases, they're working by themselves. And so, a typical manager in our business and in Frantz Building Services, and I think in a lot of business, will have 20 employees who are working for them. They may not see that employee but once or twice a week, and maybe even once every other week. And so, how do you press culture into someone that you don't see every week? I work for companies where I mean, we see everybody every day, and we can round everybody up, and the president of the company or a senior leader could share things. In this case, we're really relying on those field managers to be sort of that torch carrier. And so, what's important there, I think, in creating culture is pressing the culture down to those field managers and educating them and training them on how to carry that message down to the cleaner. I think that's the key.
I agree. That's a smart way of looking at it. So you have your employees, you have that company culture we talked about, leadership style. Let's talk about that. Because no matter what work you do, those that manage are those that really set the tone for the company. How does this all play into this topic of managing turnover?
Yeah, I mean, we'll go right back to the generation. So we've got to educate our field managers about what motivates those different generations of workers and teach them how to interact with those folks. So when you're talking to a boomer, they're kind of bought in to begin with, but just talking with them and being able to communicate with them about the steadiness of this job and thanking them for the good work that they do. When you're engaged with a Gen Z or a Gen X and a millennial, I think we've got to teach them to engage them teach the field leaders to ask them questions, to draw things out of them, and make them a part of the organization, what's going on in the organization. So there's some training that has to be done about the different generations that are working with us.
Work-life balance. That's another term that we've heard a lot about. How important is promoting that in the company to manage employee turnover and retention?
Yeah, so I think when I think work-life balance, there's only so much, I guess, work-life balance that we can do with that end cleaner. I mean, there's a work that has to be done.
Mm-hmm.
They've got a shift and they go out there and they do their work. Where the work-life balance really comes into play is with our field leaders. And we've got to make sure, again, those are the folks that, like I said, they're carrying that torch out to the team member. And so we've really got to work with them to make sure that they've got that good balance. And so one way to do that is to create some flexibility in their schedule. And we do that with our field leaders. And so we offer them the ability to say, hey, if you want to work a couple of days a week from 7 a.m. to 3 o'clock, and then our other days being in the evening, because a lot of our cleaning is going on in the evening. So they've got to be available at some point to be in the buildings when those folks are there.
What about a rewards or recognition program? Does that have a lot of value to what we're talking about here?
I think it does. I think for the end cleaner, I think the rewards and recognition should come from two things. One, tenure with the company. If we're trying to increase retention, is celebrating those times, celebrating those milestones with the company. I think that's a big deal. And then also, it's important for us as companies to survey our customers and get feedback, and then pass that feedback along to the cleaners. I think that's where the reward and recognition comes along there. And then for the field managers, I would come back to creating compensation that's centered around, or at least part of the compensation or the extra compensation is based on how well they're doing keeping their team in a cohesive manner.
Okay, last question. Exit question. Let's talk about exit interviews. No matter what we do, people do leave.
That's right.
Do you find value in exit interviews? And if so, what are some ways to make them impactful for the future?
Yeah, I do. I think there is some value in exit interviews. I also think there's some value in employee satisfaction surveys. I think the key is what do you do with that data? If it's just asking for asking's sake, then it's not really worth asking. But if what you're doing is you're gathering feedback, and you can use that feedback to help you as a company make decisions. So, for instance, a lot of the feedback we get in exit interviews, there's two main pieces. I wanted more pay, and there's not a lot we can do about that. But secondly, what we get is and I'll paraphrase, I didn't have a really good relationship with our manager. And so when we get that feedback from an exit interview, it's important to go back to the manager, coach them how to interact with their team members in a better way to increase retention.
So any of those watching this want to better manage employee turnover and staff retention, good advice. Thank you for this.